Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Sutta study here at Empty Cloud Monastery. So I'll be continuing with some selected verses from the Dhammapada. We can start by paying homage to the Buddhas, and then I'll begin the morning Sutta study. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So, as mentioned, I've been revising my translation of the Dhammapada, and as I'm going through revising it, I'm sharing some of the verses which I particularly like and which I think have a meaning that's worth exploring more deeply. So today I'd like to talk a bit about Dhammapada verses 38 and 39. So this comes from chapter 3. So chapter 3 is the Chitta Vagga, the chapter on mind. And I should point out, by the way, that the chapter names in the Dhammapada are sometimes relevant and sometimes not so relevant. So don't put too much importance on the chapter names. The chapter names were added by later editors, so they weren't part of the original verses. Also, in some editions of the Dhammapada, each verse has a name or a title, but those also were later editions by editors. They weren't part of the original teachings. So, Dhammapada verses 38 and 39. So I'll read this through in English, and then I'll go back through and talk about it in more detail, including referencing the Pali of these words. So the verses say, "For one whose mind is unsettled, who does not understand the true Dhamma, and whose clarity is disturbed, wisdom does not become complete." And then verse 39, "One whose mind is free from influences, whose mind is unafflicted, who has abandoned both merit and evil, and is alert, has no fear." So again, as usual, the Dhammapada, so two very short, punchy verses. And these aren't technically a couplet. They're not technically a pair, as we find elsewhere in the Dhammapada, but they are adjacent to each other, and they do have a certain connection, which is why I'm taking them together today. So this first one, so it starts off, "For one whose mind is unsettled." So in Pali, that's unavattita chitta. So this is from the word titta, which literally means to stand. So it means, literally it means standing, but also it then has the meaning of steady or stable. So then if one's mind is not avattita, then that means the mind is unsteady, unstable, unsettled. So this is referring to someone whose mind is restless, is wandering. Someone whose mind lacks samadhi, lacks concentration. And the next line, "One who does not understand the true Dhamma." So in Pali, this is saddhammang avijanato. So saddhamma, saddhamma is translated here as true Dhamma, which is one way of taking this. So true Dhamma, then this is another way of talking about right view, sammaditthi. So the true Dhamma then is the teachings of the Buddha, which includes all the usual stuff, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, karma, rebirth, the three characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta. So all the usual critical qualities of the true Dhamma. The term Saddhamma can also be translated the good Dhamma. So the prefix Sat can mean either true or good. Good in the sense of that which is wholesome, that which is which leads towards benefit, which is beneficial, that which is morally good. So this also is an element of the Dhamma. So the word Dhamma was already in use at the time of the Buddha to refer to any collection of spiritual teachings. So the Buddha was also distinguishing. He says, yeah, there were other Dhammas. In fact, in a number of suttas, the Buddha refers to the teachings of other religious traditions at the time. He refers to it as Dhamma, in the sense that, oh, it's their Dhamma. It's that teacher's Dhamma. It's that tradition's Dhamma. Interestingly enough, he also used the word Vinaya in the same way. So sometimes people think that the term Dhamma Vinaya refers specifically to Buddhism, but that's actually not correct. The term Dhamma Vinaya refers to the teachings and practices of any particular religion or spiritual tradition. So here then, when the Buddha is talking about Saddhamma, he's making this distinction. He's saying there's true Dhamma and there's false Dhamma. There's good Dhamma and there's bad Dhamma. So the Dhamma that was being taught by other traditions, it might have some elements of truth, but it probably also has some elements that are wrong, that are false, that are incorrect. And there might be some aspects of those Dhammas that are good, but there's also probably some aspects that are bad, that are not so good. Whereas the Buddha's Dhamma, the Buddha Dhamma is always Saddhamma. It's always true Dhamma. It's always good Dhamma. So one who does not understand the true Dhamma, again, this means somebody who doesn't understand all the aspects of right view. So maybe they don't understand karma, they don't understand rebirth, they don't understand that our suffering is self-generated, that we create our own dukkha through our own delusion and craving. They don't understand the importance of the Eightfold Path. Maybe they reject certain elements of the Eightfold Path, rejecting morality or rejecting samadhi. Or rejecting the entire Eightfold Path, as the case may be. And then this next line, one whose clarity is disturbed. So in Pali here, the word translated as clarity in Pali is pasada. And the word pasada has several rather distinct meanings. So pasada, one meaning is in fact clear, clarity. So it's sometimes used in the suttas to refer to, for example, a clear pool of water. So clear that you can see all the pebbles on the bottom. So that's one way the word pasada is used. Pasada is also used in the meaning of joy. So when the mind is joyful, blissful, that's also a use of the word pasada. Pasada is also used in the sense of serene. So when the mind is serene, it's blissfully peaceful. And pasada also has the meaning of faith or confidence. So for example, one of the definitions of a stream enterer is that they have avecha pasada in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. They have an unshakable pasada in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So in that case, it has the meaning of faith or confidence. So when we see the word pasada in Pali, it's good to keep in mind all of these different meanings. So it means that one has clarity of mind. It also means that one has a serenity of mind. It also means that one has a quality of joy, so peaceful joy. And it means that one has faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So here, when it says one's clarity is disturbed, so one should take this as understanding then that one's, again, like when you have a pool of water that's turbid, it's all mixed up, then the dust gets stirred into the water, so the water becomes murky and muddy and unclear. And also the water, because it's turbid, it's not serene. The water is agitated. And that's not a pleasant state of being. So when your mind is all muddy and stirred up, then that's not blissful, that's not joyful. In fact, it's uncomfortable and awkward. And similarly, when we don't see things clearly, then it's hard to have real faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So you can see how this is communicating this whole range of meaning here. And it's difficult to catch that whole range of meaning in translation, which is one of the reasons why it's very important to have at least a superficial understanding of the Pali terms being used here. And so the Buddha says, when you have a person like this, then their wisdom does not become complete. So in Pali, that's panya na paripurati. So paripurati means completely full. It's the same word that's used when, for example, when the moon is full. You would use the same word, like the moon is becoming full. You would use the same word, paripurati. So there's that same sense that we're trying to make our wisdom completely full, completely all-encompassing, with nothing left out, no piece missing. So the Buddha is saying, if you really want to complete and perfect your wisdom, then it's necessary to have a settled mind, a steady and stable mind. So this is one reason why Samadhi practice is so incredibly important. If you want to stabilize your mind, well, there's no substitute for Samadhi. And of course, Samadhi depends upon Sila, depends upon morality, and it's also nourished by wisdom. And he says, if you want to complete your wisdom, then you need to have a good understanding of the true Dhamma. So this also is a very important part of our practice. So a certain amount of study of the Dhamma is a very important component of understanding the Dhamma. And not just studying the Dhamma, but also making a real effort to understand what it's talking about and the relevance of the Dhamma to our life. And also approaching the Dhamma with a humble mind, the mind of a student who wishes to learn. So not approaching the Dhamma with arrogance, with an arrogant, argumentative attitude. So I've encountered a lot of people over the years who they approach the Dhamma not really with an interest to understand the Dhamma, but rather with an interest of seeing how they can push their own opinions, or seeing how they can argue the superiority of their own opinions above the Dhamma. Or it's approaching the Dhamma to see how they can accommodate and rewrite the Dhamma to fit their own ideas. So this is all quite dangerous. Rather, we should start with a genuine intention to understand the Dhamma and to see its applicability in our own life. And then, as mentioned, if one's clarity is disturbed, so understanding here that clarity of mind, serenity of mind, joyfulness of mind, and faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, those are all what's meant by this term pasada. So somebody who is lacking mental clarity, serenity, joyfulness, and faith is going to have a very difficult time cultivating wisdom. So this is pointing to, again, the importance of serenity of mind, the importance of mindfulness, so clarity of awareness and attention, the value of joyfulness in one's practice. Actively cultivating a sense of joy. So Buddhist practice is not meant to be some horribly painful, depressing struggle. but rather every step along the path is a step of joy, a step of happiness. Then the next verse, so Dhammapada 39. So this first line, one whose mind is free from influences. So in Pali, this is anavasuta chitta. So avasuta is, etymologically, it's identical with the word asava. So this is not so clear if one is not familiar with Pali etymology. It's not immediately clear that these two words are related. So avasuta and asava. But they actually come from the same root. So the meaning is nearly identical. And it's translated here as influences. And this particular translation is not my own inspiration. It actually comes from Ayasoma, who pointed out that this is the literal meaning of the word. So influence of what? So the asavas are the influences of, let's see, bhavasava, so the influence of wanting to be something. Kamasava, the influence of sensuality. And avijasava, the influence of ignorance or delusion. So these are the influences that keep us constantly spinning around in samsara, constantly lost in the defilement and corruption of samsara. So one whose mind is free from influences means that one is not influenced by craving for any state of being, craving for sensuality, or influenced by delusion, by ignorance and delusion, wrong view. The next line said, one whose mind is unafflicted. So the Pali word here for afflicted is anvahata, which has the meaning of someone who's been attacked or injured or even killed. So when our mind is under the influence of defilement, it's like we're being attacked. It's like we're being struck or stabbed, wounded or poisoned. So it's good to recognize this, because often when we're in the midst of our defilements, we're actually delighting in our own defilement. Often there's this idea of like, oh, it's me. It feels like me. It reminds me of me. So there's a certain comfortable familiarity in the painfulness of one's own defilements. A certain comfortable familiarity in being immersed in one's own corruption. So it's important to recognize what's actually happening, to recognize the fact that our mind is in fact afflicted. Our mind is injured. Our mind is poisoned, diseased. This is not something to delight in. It's not something to identify as. Rather, it's something that we should be trying to remedy as quickly and completely as possible. So one whose mind is unafflicted, again, this is somebody who's not under the influence of defilement of any sort. And then this line, one who has abandoned both merit and evil. So in Pali, this is punya, papa, pahina. So punya means merit or good karma, and papa is evil, so bad karma. And pahina means abandoned or discarded or thrown away. So this is not to be misunderstood. So this doesn't mean that one stops doing good things. It doesn't mean that one gives up doing good things. Nor does it mean that one stops avoiding doing bad things. But rather, one is recognizing that ultimately the purpose of punya, the purpose of good karma, is to produce pleasant states of existence within samsara. And the purpose of avoiding evil is to avoid having unpleasant conditions within samsara. So a fully awakened being is actually not the least bit interested in any kind of existence within samsara. They're not the least bit interested in producing any further state of being. So there's therefore no urge to create good karma and therefore produce good conditions. And there's also no fear of bad karma, which would lead to bad conditions. However, an awakened being naturally behaves with perfect morality. So they don't need to make any effort to produce good karma because they're just naturally behaving with perfect morality anyway. And they don't need to make any effort to avoid creating bad karma because there's nothing in their mind which would lead them towards doing anything harmful. So there's no longer any thought of good karma or bad karma. There's no longer any effort to produce any state of being, whether pleasant or unpleasant. Nonetheless, their effortless behavior is that of perfect morality. Their natural conduct is that of perfect morality. So this particular line of the Dhammapada is sometimes used to justify moral relativism or just straight up amorality. Sometimes it's used to justify people saying, well, the Buddha says to give up good and evil, therefore I can do whatever I want. But that's actually not what this line is saying. The line is not saying that you can do whatever you want. Rather, it's saying that an awakened being no longer thinks in terms of good and evil. They naturally only do what is good, but not out of desire for any particular result, rather because all harmful tendencies have been removed from their mind. And he makes this statement. So one who has these qualities, their mind is free from influences, is unafflicted, they're not interested in producing any kind of karma, whether good or bad, and they're alert. Such a person has no fear. In other words, what is it that we fear? What is the basis of fear? Well, fear ultimately arises from defilement. It arises from defilement and delusion. It arises from craving and aversion. So fear of what? Fear of a bad death, fear of a painful rebirth, fear of not getting what we want, fear of getting what we don't want. This is all based upon defilement. Or fear of what we don't understand, fear of what we don't see. Well, that's based on a lack of mindfulness and wisdom. So it's based on delusion and ignorance. So one who has cleared their mind of all defilement and delusion, there's no basis for the arising of fear. So fear can only arise in an unenlightened mind. It cannot arise in an enlightened mind. So one of the terms for an arhat, for an awakened being, is a fearless one, one who is not touched by fear. So here's a brief overview of these Dhammapada verses, so verses 38 and 39. So at this time, if there's any questions or comments, I would be delighted to answer your questions as best I can. So welcome to everyone who's joining in. So hello to Michael, Melissa, Amaranta, Mike, Kumu, Geeta, Sud, Ashin, Jayanta, Bhante Sankicha. Hello, Bhante. Good to see you. Always lovely to see other monastics joining in. Hello to Ja, Chitta Sangvaro, Pandit Chitta Sangvaro. Is that Venerable Pandit, Ajahn Pandit, who I met in Australia a few years ago? If so, hello, Ajahn. Good to see you again. Hello to Deepti, Gina, Deborah, Sanjay, Chow. Hello to all of you. Wow, lovely to see all of you joining in. So I don't see any questions so far. Do we have any questions from the residents? No? Nope, pretty straightforward. Yeah, I mean, what can I say? Sometimes the Dhammapada speaks for itself and there's not really any need for further discussion. So I see a question coming up. So Sud asks, How does one remove fear of a bad rebirth despite not achieving any paths or fruits? And how does one avoid defilements from taking over the mind, especially when fatigued or tired? So removing fear of a bad rebirth despite not achieving any paths or fruits. So the way you do this is through performing as much good karma as you can, constantly reminding yourself of your own goodness, reminding yourself of your own good karma that you've been generating, constantly reminding yourself of your own commitment to goodness, and reminding yourself of your own faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So this helps to reassure you that you're generating all the conditions that lead to good rebirth, and that you're not generating conditions that lead to a bad rebirth. So it's good to remind ourselves of our own goodness. Often when reading the suttas or learning about very advanced monastics, then there can be a sense of insufficiency. So the ideal that is set in the suttas is extremely high. So if we compare ourselves to the ideal of an arhat, then of course we're going to be falling a little bit short, or a lot short. But it's important rather to focus on how much goodness we're already developing. So rather than comparing ourselves to the ideal of an arhat and then thinking that we're not good enough, instead, actually, if you want to compare yourself to anyone, compare yourself to the average worldling. Compare yourself to the ordinary person who doesn't know the Dhamma and who goes through life confusedly following their own impulses and urges and defilements. So by comparison, you're probably doing pretty well, actually. So there's certainly improvement to be done. So Buddhism is the constant path of self-improvement until finally one day there's nothing left to improve. So of course there's always more to be done, but it's good to remind ourselves of how much progress we've made already and how much goodness we've already accumulated. As for how to avoid defilements from taking over the mind, especially when fatigued or tired, well, I mean, generally speaking, the way we do this is through practicing sila, samadhi, and panya. So sila, normally we translate it as morality or virtue, but another meaning of the word sila is habit. So the more you practice morality, the more it becomes your habit, the natural tendency of mind. So keep building up those habits of morality. Then even when you're not in your best, even when you're fatigued or tired or sick or confused, then those habits of goodness will naturally take over, and you'll keep behaving appropriately even when you're not in your best shape. So really work on building up those good habits, those habits of purity and compassion. Similarly, samadhi. So samadhi practice helps us to steady and stabilize the mind, which prevents defilements from taking over. And also it's the basis for wisdom. So wisdom is ultimately how we cut defilements off at the base. So through wisdom, we can see the harmfulness of indulging in defilements so that we're less likely to do it in the first place. And also ultimately, we can see what's underlying those defilements. Ultimately, all defilement is based upon self-identity, self-attachment. So through cultivating the recognition of impermanence and not self, then ultimately we can cut off all tendency towards defilement entirely. And so Ajahn Pandit confirms it is in fact the monk I met in Australia a few years ago. So good to see you. I hope that you'll come and visit Empty Cloud sometime soon. And he asks, is Ceto Vimutti apart from punya and papa? I would say yes. Yes. Because the liberated mind, so the mind of an awakened being is no longer subject to any kind of bhava. Because it's not subject to bhava, then it's not in the realm of punya and papa. Then AS asks, even without complete understanding yet, can we experience fruits of the path? Are they really fruits even though wisdom and understanding is incomplete? Well, it depends. If you're using fruit in the more general sense of meaning the benefits and blessings of something, then the answer is yes. And the amount of benefit you receive is directly proportionate to the amount of sincerity and effort that you put into your practice. If by fruits you specifically mean the technical terms of Sotapatti Pala, Sakadagami Pala, Anagami Pala, and Arhata Pala, so the fruit of the 4 stages of awakening, then the answer there is no. You don't experience those fruits until you attain the corresponding stage of awakening. But if you mean fruits in the more general sense, then yeah, actually if you practice Buddhism even for 1 second, then you can notice benefits from that. If you practice for a day, then you'll notice benefits from that. If you practice for a year, then you'll notice even more benefit from that. So in the more ordinary sense that we use the word fruits, then yes, you can experience it no matter what degree to which you practice. If you practice 1%, then you'll experience 1%. If you practice 2%, you'll experience 2%, and so on. So it's also good to periodically reflect and pay attention to the blessings and benefits and happiness and serenity and joy that we're getting from the practice that we are doing. Again, often we get fixated on our flaws and failings. We get fixated on how much work there is left to do, and we overlook how much blessing we've already received from the practice we've done so far. So it's good to periodically remind ourselves of the happiness and serenity and clarity that we've already developed through however much practice we've already done. And that's the last of the questions. So if there's nothing else, then we can go ahead and end for the morning. So thank you all for joining in. So this evening we'll have meditation and a Dhamma talk, and then tomorrow another sutta study and monk chat in the evening. So please continue joining in, and we can end the morning with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, we'll see you next time.